Hello, St. Matthew's United Methodist Church, and the rest of you, our community who's joining us online. I'm Pastorkelly.
And I'm Pastordave.
And it's great to be back from the holidays.
It is.
I got to preach last week, but there was nobody to do a podcast with. So, actually, that's a joke because I was sick last week, so we didn't get to do mine. Boo. But hey, Dave preached Sunday. And we've started our new series called Wrestling with Doubt, which I think is, just incredibly important. I think it's, I love talking about the topic of doubt and as a spiritual person because my own kind of faith journey, I've been around some really great teachings on doubt, and I've been around some not so great teachings on doubt. I think Dave not only crushed it, but I think especially with everything that's been going on in my personal life, but everything that's kind of going on around me and people I talk to consistently about kind of what's happening in their lives and what God's up to and culturally and globally and all the things that are going on, I think that this is an incredibly valuable topic to discuss and talk about. And Dave, I think you brought not only a really good godly perspective to it. I think it's just an important time to talk about it. The Spirit is with us. I got to find something to do with that, by the way. Maybe like, I don't know, got to find some gimmick. That's right. That's going in. So you came out of Genesis 1, 26 through 28 and Matthew 2, 16 through 18. You want to give us a little bit of context?
Sure. Let's talk about the series just a little bit more. Not only is the series generally about doubt, but we're really answering kind of the questions that everybody asks. Right. So I'm using Adam Hamilton's book by the same name, Wrestling with Doubt, kind of as a guide. And he had the resources to do a survey of thousands of people and ask them about doubt and the questions that gave them doubt and reason to pause about their faith. And so the 6-week series is really the 6 top questions that people have about faith. And so I was eager to really kind of do a series, trying to answer the questions that people have and address those issues that are real stumbling blocks in a lot of people's faith.
Right.
And so that's kind of the advent of this series and where it's coming from. So this question about, if God is good, why do the innocent in the world suffer? And I think it's laid out, that's why I chose the Genesis passage. I think it's laid out really well right there where it says, we're coming from, this is the first creation story. This is on the 7th day. God created humanity on that day. And then the passage says, and then God gave humans dominion over the birds of the air, the fish of the sea. And really that's the key right there that I really want to touch on. What is being referred to there is in theological circles, we call it free will. So God gave humanity dominion over creation. He gave them freedom to do what they would with creation. Now, this has been used in negative ways, people justifying, God gave us permission to pollute, and God gave us permission to tear down mountains, and God gave us permission to do all of these things. So it's used as justification for really destroying creation, which is not really what I think is something we should be bragging about. Or
you don't say, Dave.
For sure. Dominion in the Hebrew word that comes from is the same word that means to rule, as in a king would rule over the kingdom.
Yep.
We can look over, throughout the history, throughout Scripture, there's certainly tons of examples of kings who ruled well, and they were reckoned as righteous. And the stories about them talked about how well they reigned and how well they ruled when they took up the godly kind of perspectives of taking care of the the least, the last, and the lonely within the kingdom, and making sure the widows and the orphans were cared for. Those are the kings that were held up as the example. Their rule, their dominion was well.
Doesn't sound like a lot of the rulers that I know that people like revere. They took care of orphans and widows and made sure everybody had enough and people were taken care of. Boo!
Well, if you're in that society and you find yourself as one of those who are in need, then you're gonna sing their praises.
I've just highlighted the contrast of what and I think you're hitting this already. And let's expand this point real quick before we get to the other one. So there is if I'm hearing you right then, so in this part in Genesis 1:26-28, right? Like we can read our own meaning into, the Hebrew word translates better to ruler, but the word ruler in this context is not defined by our perspective of what a ruler is supposed to be or what a ruler is. It's defined by what God says a ruler is.
Well, we get to decide how we want to rule.
100%. We have free will in that.
We have free will. The question is our will going to align with God's will?
100%. Right. So good clarification there. So I'm not saying we're automatons or robots and God just like puppets us. No. But what I'm getting at is the joke I made, right? Which is, I've heard the word ruler before, and people have, and there's a lot of different kinds of rulers. But the way that God defines a ruler after, quote unquote, God's own heart, or the way that God has intended us to rule as people, right, looks very different, or can look very different than like what our perspective or what human beings would consider. Oh, that's a just ruler. And I go, they just killed like half the population. Like that's not a just ruler. And so, like you said, then you have these lineages of Jewish kings, right, who, when they're referred to as righteous rulers, they're people who seem to be very focused on people's quality of life and access to medicine and being safe and opportunities and taken care of. And it's not necessarily what those people produce. They just have inherent worth and value because they matter to God. And then, we love them well. So correct. Like we can decide how we want to do that. I liked that you hit, what were the three you hit of pollution, destruction, other things. And then, I've got a laundry list of, Christian buzzwords or phrases I hear from people in the church of, this is what it means to rule your household. And I go, whoa, hold on. What do we, as pastors, right? Pastoral authority, you rule like, and I'm like, whoa. And so I'm just calling attention to this phrase and this statement you're making, because I think you did a wonderful job Sunday of kind of explaining this, and we're talking about it now. But it's really important, I think, especially in the overarching theme of this conversation we're having around suffering, right? It's critically important, if you will, to understand this well. And as God has intentioned it, or what God is asking and desiring us to do from the position of ruling and context, because it helps this other part we're going to go into. Because if it's not done well, or if it's not done in obedience or into submission to what God's will is, as God has intentionally designed us and created us to do this, there are some very serious, devastating consequences to it not being done well.
True.
Which we see later in Matthew 2:16-18, where it's like, hey.
So I chose the Matthew passage. We're in the season of Epiphany, so that Epiphany is the story of when the wise men come, where the three kings, whatever your tradition is around the name of those, where they come and they recognize who Jesus is. And so Epiphany is about Jesus being revealed to the world. So the wise men come and they recognize Jesus, and then they don't go back home on the same road that they came. They came through and they talked to Herod on the way, and so Herod on the way to see Jesus, and so Herod knew, that they were going to go recognize a king who was not Herod, that they were gonna have Jesus be revealed, and then they were told in a dream. The passage says to go another way, or to go home by another road.
Man, these dreams in the Gospels are very helpful.
Yes, they are. Almost like God is kind of helping. The passage then goes on to say, and this is the passage we read, the 2:16 passage in Matthew, is that Herod had all of the children in the area of Bethlehem killed.
From the ages of 2 to
up to 2.
Up to 2, right?
Yeah. So all the infants up to 2 years of age in that area killed, so that he wouldn't have to deal with another king. He wouldn't have to share power or have his power taken away. And so he used his dominion. Herod used his dominion to further his own purposes and not the purposes of God. So if you were one of those families who had an infant killed by the king, slaughtered, if they cried out to God in wailing about God killing these babies, my point in this reading this passage was to say God didn't kill those children. Herod did. Humanity has dominion. We have free will to act as we will. And that has sometimes devastating consequences. But it also means that we can choose to do and to share grace, to do wonderful things, and to create societies where justice prevails.
Right.
Or we can choose to do the opposite. This is the world that God has created for us. And when innocent people suffer, often it's not because God has chosen to kill that baby or to give somebody cancer. It's because that of misdeeds of humanity,
right?
Very often.
Yeah, and you mentioned cancer, so I think too, what's always really difficult around this question. So back to Adam Hamilton and the resources that he has. So and Adam's a fantastic guy. If you read the book, read anything by Adam. Check out his sermon series and sermons and check out their stuff. Adam's fantastic pastor. Great insight. And I think sometimes too, what's so hard about this question, right? So for me, like whenever we're asking questions so Adam does this whole thing where he polls and goes, okay, what are the big questions that everybody's asking, right? Like, and it's always like some existential thing. It's like, why am I here? What is my purpose? Cool. We'll get to that probably in a couple of weeks. Maybe, I don't know. And then like, why do innocent people suffer? And so I want to kind of go into this space, right? So we've touched on dominion. So God gives dominion to people over all of creation. Not in equality with God. We are not equal to God, but we have a role to play in the dominion as God has designed it, and is asking us to be willing participants in having dominion and taking care of and ruling over. Because rule in like our language and our context has a very different, I think, kind of thrust to it or meaning to it than, Jesus was a ruler. Jesus ruled by serving with humility and caring for others and loving people well. And I'm like, oh, so it's backwards. But in that, right? So we've talked about dominion. Now we're talking about why do innocent people suffer? And I think this question always is never about just the question. It's about what informs why someone would ask the question. Because like for me, if I go, okay, God, why am I suffering? It's not because I want to know why I'm suffering. Because like finding out why I suffer is not going to fix the fact that I'm suffering. I don't want to suffer. Like that's the goal here is like, could I just not? Could it just like not be this way? So it's good to have clarity on causality and some of the reasons why these things happen. But I'm here to encourage you, watcher and listener, that if we pigeonhole this question and we want some concrete answer or one-size-fits-all answer in this that is applicable in every situation in life, it doesn't work this way. I wanted to make that distinction because when you mentioned cancer, right, like that's such a it's or even Herod, right? Like there's all these places where we can say that it's not God doing it. But it's also like we want to know why it's happening. And sometimes those answers aren't as clear as, well, because of this. And it's like, well, so I think to move this into part of the solutions of this, right? So when we talk about, well, why do the innocent suffer? Well, first and foremost, I'm assuming I'm innocent. And that's not to say that if I wasn't innocent that I would suffer, because that's not what this question does. So I say that so we can check that off the list. That's not what we're answering. Well, am I innocent or not innocent? Because then I get what I deserve. And we're going to touch on this soon. That's not it. Well, I've been given dominion, so if I rule well, then I won't suffer. Also untrue.
Right.
That's not how this works. I think what I love about this Herod example, which, by the way, like, this is a part of Scripture that's really hard for me to read because it's just so evil. Right? My sermon last week, I talked about the census. Talked about after Jesus was born, how Mary and Joseph, who are dutiful Jewish people, when he's very little, and Mary is kind of just like a little bit postpartum, they make this crazy trek to register Christ in a Roman-occupied territory. So this is a Jewish observance. It's a Jewish law. But the Romans have access to the records. So when Herod's like, hey, how many babies are 2 and under? Jesus' name is on a list. So then Herod's like, we'll kill them all. And so this isn't Herod just waking up one day having a bad day and going, you know what, I had indigestion last night and I'm mad because my kingdom could be taken from me. Herod has made intentional steps and methodology and resource to figure out where they are and go find them and then kill them. This is not like absent-minded. This is intentional evil.
Well, and he's not looking, I mean, there's one child that he's scared of.
Yes.
And he can't find that one child, so he just says, kill them all.
So he's going through the list going, hey, guards, did you kill them all? Because I want to make sure we get the one that I'm looking for, but like, did we kill them all, right? Because you can't tell if he got him or not. And like you said, so it's in an effort to get rid of one baby, Herod leans into this unspeakable part of himself that can do horrific evil with influence and dominion and kills numerous. And like you were saying, it now you've got these people, and I mean, I'm me. So like, I'm like, man, like, be great to be a guard, right? Be under Herod's charge and go, oh yeah, I just so glad the orders today are to go kill babies. This is fantastic. I'm so glad I signed up for this, but like this affects everybody. This is just a dark, evil thing. And so then people are left with the question of like, why is this happening? And how could this happen to us? So this isn't a question you answered, but I think it fits in here before we get to the next part, which is, well, if God is loving, how could this happen? And I'll insert one more phrase that falls in this, and this is my favorite one, is, well, if God is all powerful, then how could this happen? Well, Genesis 1 literally tells us how. Well, we have dominion. You have free will. You have a choice. We can choose to do wonderful, good, loving, God-filled things. And not saying then your other option is Herod, but like, because you're not Herod. I'm not Herod. You're not Herod. But like, but in that scope, right, of like, or, we can do some really messed up, heinous stuff. Oof.
Yeah, faith. This world that we live in is filled with all sorts of dangers, all sorts of corruption, and having a life of faith does not mean we have a force field. That surrounds us. That was the next question, dude. That surrounds us, that protects us. We're not protected from the evil of the world.
No, we are not. So this was one of the other notes I had. Thanks, Dave. Spoiler.
Anytime.
Suffering is not a punishment or a reward. This is something you said from the pulpit, and you kind of touched on it there, but why don't you flesh that out a little bit more?
So one of the, as I've struggled with this, both personally and with other people over the years that I've been in ministry, there's a passage that I found that really kind of helps um, um, in this question. It comes from Matthew chapter 5. It's part of the Sermon on the Mount from Jesus, where Jesus says he's giving the command to love your enemy. And then he adds to that. He says because the sun shines on the good and the evil, the rain falls upon the righteous and the unrighteous. So he is saying that in his description of the world that has been created, he's saying there's all of this stuff out there, both good and bad, that just kind of as part of the lay of the land. And that good happens and bad happens, and it's not because you're righteous or unrighteous. It's just part of the creation that is made. It's not that the evil necessarily are being punished. It's not that the good are being rewarded. It's that these things happen in life as part of this creation.
Right.
Being that this comes from Jesus, part of the Sermon on the Mount, gives it weight to me and has me helps me to put emphasis on that because I'm a follower of Jesus. And so to hear him say that evil occurrences or bad things that happen to people are not because they've deserved it. Good things that happen to people are not necessarily because they deserve it. It's just things that kind of happen as part of the course of living in creation.
Yeah, so because my brain is my brain, I talked a little bit before about kind of like my faith formation and my faith journey, right? And so, for a long time for me, what was always really helpful, what I always found really helpful, right, was, well, if I can understand whatever the way, like the work gets me. Like if there's, and this sounds like really dumb, I think. Or you might be like, Kelly, of course that's not how it works. But like, you'd be surprised at how so many of us think this way or we believe this way, right? Is, well, if I do good things, well, then good things are going to happen for me. And if I like, if I do this, then here's kind of the guarantee or the earnings of that, or like this or that. And because I want some assuredness or I want some level of, security or stability or knowing that what I'm working towards is good or what I'm doing is blessed by God and it's intention, like it's in line, right? And I think I live in a culture, I don't know about the rest of y'all, but I think I live in a culture that very much prioritizes and says that's how it works. That if you do this, then and it's good, then the outcome is the proof that this thing was good. Now, Jesus, or the epistles more often, talk about things like fruit and the assurance of what we've done of it being good is the fruit that it, quote unquote, produces. But I don't think the production of fruit or the fruit that we get to measure against is necessarily a wage or this promise of safety and security or like that means then good. I think back to Matthew 5, what I love about where Jesus puts this in the Sermon on the Mount, right, is as I started to learn that my perspective that way was not only totally off base, but it wasn't what God was up to. It's not what God is up to, and it's not what God was trying to share with me or have me like do, is that it's so much more freeing to understand that like God has called me into these things that I can do, that I can go, oh, this is the thing that I get to go, oh, this is fruitful and good. And it's not even necessarily always about what that produces or what I get back from it. It's just like I can focus my energy and the way that I was intentionally created and come alive in that because it's submitted to God and it's good and it's wholesome and it's just full of Jesus and it's exactly what it's supposed to be, and that's it. It's not about what happens then later. It's not about what I get because of that. It's just being in that moment. And so when Jesus is talking about loving your enemy and blessing those who persecute you and caring for those, when we get to be free in that, it's because I'm not concerned with having to control everyone and everything else, because the proof of the good that God has called me to be a part of and to do and to have dominion in the way that God has intended it to be, the proof of that is not that then the world then does what it's supposed to do. It's that while the world is losing its ever-loving mind and rulers like Herod get to have dominion and do evil, I get to be a part of doing the good that God has called us to do, and then that's where I get to stay. It does not promise me safety. It does not promise me security. It doesn't promise me a really good, sweet bank account. It doesn't promise me wonderful retirement. It doesn't promise me health. But I get to be free in these moments where Jesus is like, hey, when you love people like this, and you're in communities, right, where people love you like this, that is so good. And then we go, oh, this is what this means. And so we're free in that to be who God has called us to be, unshackled, undeterred, not unbothered, but like controlled by these other mechanisms and devices that would go, well, you know what? The way to retain power and the way to have influence and the proof of doing the good is hoarding or retaining or being willing to do things like Herod so I can keep it. As opposed to Jesus, who and we'll get into your quote from Henry Nouwen here in a minute. But Jesus' model to us, right, was like Jesus came and suffered with us, right? And so it's like, oh, so maybe the Sermon on the Mount is a little bit of a nudge towards, oh, we're free to choose this. But all the other things that the world or we think are guarantees of that good are not how that really works.
Right. Well, and Matthew 5 puts talks about the love of enemies. So we are freed to love our enemy, which is very countercultural, right? But then that freedom that we have can be used to love instead of to hate.
Right.
Which is this freeing peace that comes from falling in line to being who God created us to be.
Right. Well, again, before we get to the Nouwen quote, like you said something before that I loved. So you talked about righteous and unrighteous. There was this other part in here. Suffering is not a punishment or a reward. So something you said Sunday that like bumper. It's not going to get anybody to listen to what I have to say. People are going to run from me. I'm like, what do you mean, Kelly? Like, I don't get what I deserve. Well, like, but like, that was one of the, maybe the major domino I was kind of referring to before. Of like, once I started, God started helping me abandon that way of thinking, really helped me to go, oh, so like, I don't get to, for me, it's really unhelpful to justify how good I am or what God is up to in my life, or like by my suffering or my unsuffering. Now, yes, of course, we can talk about like, hey, there's consequences, right? There's some things like know that, right? But you're talking more in line with like when there's some like cataclysmic or catastrophic difficult thing that happens, we're trying to figure out why this would happen, and as opposed to like, well, no, like there's no guarantee. And there never was. It's not part of how life was designed or worked. Well, that's not true. In paradise, everything was meant to work well and perfect harmony and do good. But because that's not where we currently are, now there's all this other kind of chaos and stuff that happens. But what if we adopted a mindset, right, where like we're not obsessive about people getting what they deserve? And, you know, sometimes like for me, I don't know about you, Dave, but there's some problematic ways that was portrayed to me or put to me where people would highlight like my own kind of struggles to make me feel very small and bad. Because if I have done bad things, then how dare I think about what somebody else has done? So it just made me feel like really small and terrible and bad. And that's not a helpful perspective of like, I think it's more in line with, that's not for me to figure out, because there's no good answer for that way of line of thinking. There's no solution that answers that in a way. Jesus answers it in the Sermon on the Mount, which is like, no, the answer is like, go love. Be loved, love God, love others. And as you do that, like, I'm not worried about what people deserve at that point, because I don't have time for that thinking. Like, it doesn't help with any of that. And so, like, we're set free from that. But, like, I can't tell you, Dave, how many times, like, I get stuck in that, or I think about, like, conversations I have with people where, like, that's like a thought, right? Or a pattern or a way of life where it's like, well, I should get what I deserve and other people should get what they deserve. And it's like, well, hold on. So we're going to use our dominion now to make sure everybody gets what they get. And then Jesus' response to that, right, is like, hey, let me come down and live with y'all and love y'all and show you how it is, and then die. Because Jesus totally got what Jesus deserved, right?
We used our dominion. Right. Even in the case of Christ, God come to put skin on, to be one of us, and we killed him.
Yeah. Well, Jesus was like, hey, let's love, guys. Nah. So, yeah, not necessarily abandoning that, right? Because for me, if I just try to, like, come up then with my own way of thinking, it's just as problematic as the first. It's, well, what is God's will in that, right? Like, what is God up to? What is God calling us into? And I think you put it really well with Genesis, 1:26 and 28, and then, Matthew 5, which is like, this is what it looks like. Do this. Cool. So let's talk about,
it's just that easy.
Yeah, clear as mud. It's actually way clearer than that. It's just, then I get involved and then it gets all crazy. Yeah, so suffering is not a punishment or a reward. It's a really hard type of thing to think through, right?
Well, I mean, if you get what you deserve, I mean, you're really talking about karma, the idea of karma, which is not the idea of the good news.
Right.
In the good news, we get what we don't deserve. And so, we can, those getting what you deserve, that really falls into that idea of karma, which is a topic I'm not going to go into right now. But that's not Christianity.
No, it's not. And I think there's two pieces of that, right? I think there's two negative ways to live into that, right? One is, I'm going to be an agent of using my dominion to make sure people get what they get. No. Or two, and this is the one that I find, like, myself gravitates to the most. So before I call everybody else out, right? And then people I know who are like, well, I'm not the person trying to cause that in their lives, but they're praying for it. There's a difference, right? Like, this is totally not the scripture we're using before, but a biblical account in the Gospels, right, that I think is really poignant on this is like the Good Samaritan. It's like, oh, well, you deserve the consequences of your actions. So, like, while you're bleeding and dying on the side of the street, I'm just going to walk right by you and pretend like you don't exist. And so, even if you're not, or I'm not, a person who is actively working and using my dominion to help people find their just reward, I think there's another problematic perspective of, if I'm also a passive person who's just hoping they get what they get, and I'm not working in the ways that you've mentioned, which is using dominion to help people and to love them well and to share the good news and to live that out with them in community, then they're both bad. Our dominion is also not meant to be used passively and pray that God would destroy people. It's, I've asked people before, they're like, well, let God sort them out. And I'm like, whoa, what does that mean? They're like, well, God's the judge. And I go, but Jesus. Like how do you reconcile that, right? Tell us about this Henry Nouwen quote that I have like literally said 4 times, but like I don't know any other part of it than the end.
Well, I don't think I can repeat the whole thing. It was a paragraph.
It was a really good quote, by the way. I'll find it and put it in the description underneath the video.
Nouwen just calls attention to the fact that when we suffer, in whatever that suffering is, God is with us. Christ is with us. And really, he pulls the story of the incarnation into this idea of Christ became human. This is the Christmas story. This is the idea of incarnation. You know, we've just covered that in December, and we talk about that every Christmas. But it is true every day of our lives that Christ came to be one of us, to understand the hurts that we have, to experience the same weaknesses and injuries that we have, so that he can be with us and suffer with us. And so Nouwen was putting an exclamation point on the fact that when we suffer, God suffers with us. It's not God's plan,
right,
that we suffer. It never is. One of the things that drives me crazy is that whenever there's a natural catastrophe, there always seems to be a Christian saying, and this was punishment for whatever that person's kind of thing is. Which is just not true, and it's not Christian to even say that.
It's back to me saying the concept of like, well, I wasn't actively making sure they got punished, but I sure as heck hope they did. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah. You know, this thing that Christ does, this grace that works in our lives, changes our hearts. Or it changes nothing. And we have the free will. We have the dominion to resist that change, resist the idea that we are called to be compassionate to others and to give mercy to others. And we can stay in the world, and we can still wish evil to fall upon those who deserve it. Or we can be compassionate and learn what it means to be with people in their suffering. Because God is there with us, and God is with them, whether we want Him to or not.
Say that again. No, that's a smack.
Well, yeah, God is with all of creation. We're all creatures created by God. And when any one of us is suffering, God is with us. Now, we, in our human point of view, might not want that to happen, but it's going to happen anyway.
That just sounds so bad. It's like, oh, you're suffering. I hope God isn't with you. Oh, like so.
You know, it's I do prison ministry, and I hear that an awful lot. Well, God, they deserve what they're getting. They don't deserve, Dave, you going in there and giving any kind of comfort in the name of Jesus Christ, because they don't deserve that comfort. They don't deserve the good news of Jesus Christ. And that is always really shocking when I hear that. But unfortunately, I hear it a lot.
I think kind of like, I guess my closing thought here, right, is you're touching on a thread, right, where we'll say things like, oh, well, no, they don't deserve it, or passively hoping for the destruction of people, or hope God's not over there, right? I think, there is a contrast. This is one of, I think, the hardest things about Jesus as a person, right? Because not to be that guy, but like, it's one thing when, there's a bunch of commandments and laws given to somebody that they wrote on a stone tablet thousands and thousands of years ago to a group of people that I can't relate to, and I wasn't there. And God is like passing messages to people through prophets and through visions and through dreams, and like, and we're accountable to that, right? And then it's totally different when God's like, I'm going to come as a human being and show you what I want. And I go, oh no. Like now it's like, now I can't like feign this ignorance of like, when Jesus is like, love your enemies. I'm like, wait, so hold on. What is
which enemies?
Which enemies? Like, the ones that I really like that loathe, or like the ones that like, cut me off in traffic, right? Like, and bless those who persecute. Well, hold on. Like, wait. What is that? Like, what does that mean? And so I said it before, the freedom of Christ, right? Is like, as my stuff, the light of Christ, the example of Christ, as the Spirit is at work, and God is calling to me in love and grace and mercy, as God is calling me close, and I'm like having this full awareness of my ick, right? It's not that I can just magically be compassionate because I'm like, today I'm going to be compassionate. You ever have days like that, by the way, where you're like, today I'm going to do all the good stuff, and then like, the next thing that happens is like, the day is now ruined because I lost my mind because I'm impatient, right? It's like, ah. But I would invite you into this place of when God says, hey, you have dominion. My tendency is to go, oh, I have dominion. Cool. What do I get to do with it? As opposed to, hey, God, what would you have me do with it? And so when we're talking about, when I'm talking about, when you're talking about like being compassionate, when that ick gets revealed to me, that's in me, that God is at work in, right? Because God hasn't abandoned me in my ick, but God is absolutely going, give me your ick.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I want you to be compassionate. So if you are not going to be compassionate right now, or there's parts of you that don't want to be, let me work on them. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the things that's hard too, is like, I absolutely want to view God as this God who like is long-suffering and gracious and kind and always loves me and always accepts me. Absolutely true. And also, oh, I'm wishing for judgment upon that head. And God's like, I'm not cool with that. We need to work on that. So that also comes with Jesus is like, hey, I want you to do it this way. And so when we're not, understand that God is loving and kind and patient with you, but also change. Submit over to God, give it to God, and let God then inform what you need to do now. Because that's how we use our dominion well, right? Is, okay, God, then what would you have me do? Don't run. Like, this goes back to the doubt series we're doing, is like, when you get convicted of like, oh, that's really gross and ick and evil or sinful or whatever it is in me that like, there's a light on that. Don't run from God with that. Go to God and be like, hey, God, you're gracious and kind and merciful with me. Now help me not be this. Because we need help.
Mm-hmm. No doubt.
Closing thought?
Yeah, I just want everybody to know that if you're doubting, that if you're dealing with this question of why has somebody I loved, been taken from me, or some other kind of version of that, give us a call, give us a shout, drop us an email. We've just kind of scratched the surface. There's so much more that could have been said that just can't be said in 20 or 30 minutes. But if this is you, and we know that these are the questions that are most asked. So if any time in this series we're touching on these topics and it's troubling to you or it's causing doubt within you, know that we're not going to call you a sinner, or we're not going to make fun of you for having doubts or think less of you as a Christian. I mean, that's just part of living our life as a human, is to have these doubts. But we want to help you kind of work through those things. And would, either one of us would just be blessed to have that conversation with you. So if we've touched a sore spot here, or touched a question that you're having, or a doubt that you're experiencing, give us a call. Come see us, and let's work through that. We'd love to be there for you.
Amen, brother. I'm Pastor Kelly,
and I'm Pastor Dave,
and we'll catch you next week. Bye.
Bye-bye.